What if you found a bottle in the wilderness with an ultrasound of a baby never born? A Yosemite ranger did in 2024, 8 years after the expecting couple vanished on their Babymoon. But the bottle wasn't buried randomly. It sat under a dead tree, struck by lightning the night before he found it, and carved into the bark were GPS coordinates pointing somewhere else. Michael Thornton had been a park ranger at Yosemite for 12 years. He'd seen almost everything the wilderness could throw at him: lost hikers, bear encounters, rock slide. But on the morning of June 14, 2024, he saw something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was doing a routine trail inspection near Cathedral Peak, about 8 miles from the main visitor center. The storm the night before had been brutal. Lightning had split the sky open, and thunder had shaken the valley floor. Now, in the clear morning light, Michael was checking for fallen trees and damaged trail markers. That's when he found the tree, a massive Jeffrey pine, maybe 70 feet tall, completely blackened from top to bottom. Lightning had hit it so hard that the trunk had split down the middle, and the whole thing had toppled over during the night. The smell of burnt wood still hung in the air. Michael walked around the fallen giant, documenting the damage on his radio. Then he saw it. Right where the roots had torn up from the ground, there was a small clearing in the dirt, and sitting in that clearing, completely untouched by the violence of the storm, was a glass bottle. It was an old-fashioned milk bottle, the kind you might find at a vintage store, clear glass, with a rubber stopper sealed with wax. Michael crouched down and picked it up. Inside, he could see a piece of paper rolled up tight. He carefully broke the wax seal and pulled out the paper. When he unrolled it, his hands went still. It was an ultrasound photo, black and white, slightly faded, but clear enough. A baby, maybe 20 weeks along, curled up in the womb. At the bottom, printed in small letters, were the words, Emily Parker, 18 weeks, January 12, 2016. Michael sat down on a nearby rock, the bottle cradled in his hands like something sacred. He'd found plenty of strange things in the wilderness over the years: a wedding ring wedged between 2 stones at Glacier Point, a child's teddy bear hanging from a tree branch near Half Dome. Once, he'd even found a time capsule from 1987, left by a group of college students who'd promised to return and dig it up. They never had. But this was different. This felt urgent, personal. The ultrasound photo wasn't just a forgotten keepsake. Someone had deliberately sealed it in this bottle. Someone had buried it here, in this exact spot, under this exact tree. Why? Michael studied the photo more closely. The baby's profile was visible in the grainy black and white image: a tiny nose, fingers curled near the face. Emily Parker, 18 weeks pregnant. That meant she would have been due sometime in early June 2016. Michael did the math quickly in his head. If the baby had been born on schedule, they'd be 8 years old now, 2nd or 3rd grade, learning to read, playing soccer, living a whole life. But something told Michael that hadn't happened. The way the message was written: if you find this, we tried our best. We love you, little one. Always. It sounded like a goodbye, like a last message from parents who knew they were running out of time. The coordinates bothered him too. Why not write a plea for help? Why not leave a message saying where they were, what had happened, how to find them? Instead, just numbers, a location, as if the Parkers wanted whoever found the bottle to come looking, to piece together the story themselves. Michael looked up at the fallen tree. The lightning strike had been powerful enough to split the trunk completely. The roots had torn up a crater almost 6 feet across. If the storm hadn't hit, if the tree had stayed standing, this bottle might have stayed buried for decades, maybe forever. The timing felt impossible. 8 years to the day. Almost. The Parkers had gone missing in mid-January 2016. It was now mid-June 2024. Not quite 8.5 years. Close enough to feel like more than coincidence. Michael had been a ranger long enough to know that the wilderness didn't care about timing. Nature didn't orchestrate dramatic reveals. Trees fell when they fell. Storms came when they came. But still, something about this felt deliberate, like the universe had decided it was finally time to answer answer a question nobody had been asking anymore. 8 years ago, Michael turned the photo over. On the back, written in careful handwriting, were 3 lines of text. "If you find this, we tried our best. We love you, little one, always." Below that, a set of numbers: 37.7484, -119.5326. GPS coordinate. Michael's mind was racing. Who were the Parkers? Why would someone bury an ultrasound in the middle of Yosemite? And why these specific coordinates? He pulled out his GPS device and entered the numbers. The coordinates pointed to a location about 4 miles northeast, deeper into the backcountry, a place called Tenaya Canyon. Michael knew that area well. It was one of the most dangerous sections of the park. Steep granite walls, freezing water, and almost no cell service. Rangers called it the Bermuda Triangle of Yosemite because of how many people had gotten lost or injured there over the years. Michael radioed back to headquarters. Within an hour, a small team had assembled. They needed to know what was at those coordinates, and they needed to know who Emily Parker was. The search through park records didn't take long. Emily and Jason Parker had been reported missing on January 18, 2016. They were a young couple from Sacramento. Emily was 27. Jason was 29. They'd come to Yosemite for what they called a babymoon, one last adventure before their baby arrived. Emily was 4.5 months pregnant. They'd checked into a cabin near Yosemite Village on January 10, 2016. They planned to stay for a week. According to the original missing persons report, they'd told the cabin manager they were going on a day hike to Tenaya Lake on January 17th. They never came back. The search in 2016 had been extensive. Helicopters, search dogs, volunteer teams. They'd covered hundreds of square miles, but they'd found nothing. No backpack, no clothing, no bodies. It was as if Jason and Emily Parker had simply walked into the wilderness and disappeared. The original search in 2016 had been one of the largest in Yosemite's recent history. Michael remembered it well. He'd been part of the search teams himself, covering the southern sections of the park, while other rangers swept the northern route. They'd started on January 19th, the day after the Parkers were reported missing by the cabin manager. She'd noticed their car was still in the lot, but they hadn't returned to the cabin. Their belongings were still inside. Food in the fridge, suitcases unpacked, a baby name book sitting open on the nightstand, a page dog-eared at names starting with 8. Emily's mother had driven up from Sacramento the moment she heard. Michael had been there when she arrived at the ranger station, her face pale and drawn. She'd brought photos of Emily and Jason, their wedding picture, a photo from a hiking trip they'd taken to Lake Tahoe the summer before. Emily's ultrasound photo, the same one now in Michael's pocket, he realized with a chill. The search had lasted 2 weeks. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras, search dogs trained to detect human scent, volunteer teams of experienced hikers who knew every trail in the park. They'd focused on the Tenaya Lake area first, since that's where the Parkers had said they were going, but they'd found nothing. No footprints, no disturbed campsite, no pieces of torn clothing caught on branches. The dogs had picked up a scent near the Tenaya Creek trailhead, but it had disappeared after half a mile, washed away by the creek itself or lost in the maze of granite slabs that made up so much of Yosemite's terrain. The helicopters had scanned thousands of acres. Nothing. It was as if the couple had simply evaporated. By early February, the official search had been called off. The Park Service kept the case open, of course. Rangers continued to look during their regular patrols. Posters with the Parkers' photos were hung in every visitor center and trailhead. Tips came in sporadically over the following month. Someone thought they'd seen a woman matching Emily's description near Tuolumne Meadows. Another hiker reported finding an abandoned campsite near Cloud's Rest. Every lead was investigated. Every lead went nowhere. Emily's mother had returned to the park 3 times that first year. She'd walk the trails, calling Emily's name until her voice gave out. She'd leave flowers at the trailhead where the scent had been detected. She'd sit in the visitor center, showing Emily's photo to every tourist who walked through the door. Michael had spoken with her several times. She'd told him that not knowing was the worst part. If Emily and Jason were dead, she could grieve. She could bury them. She could begin to heal. But this endless uncertainty, it was torture. The media had covered the story extensively at first. Young couple, pregnant wife, romantic Babymoon turned tragic. It had all the elements of a heartbreaking headline. News vans had camped outside the park entrance. Reporters had interviewed everyone who'd known the Parkers. Friends described them as adventurous but careful. Jason was an experienced hiker. Emily was cautious, especially now that she was pregnant. They weren't reckless. They wouldn't have taken unnecessary risks. But as weeks turned into months with no new developments, the media moved on. Other stories took priority. Other tragedies demanded attention. By the summer of 2016, the Parkers were just another cold case, another mystery the mountains had swallowed whole. The families never stopped looking. Jason's brother had hired a private investigator who'd spent 6 months combing through the park. He'd found nothing the official search hadn't already covered. Emily's mother had set up a Facebook page dedicated to finding her daughter. She'd posted updates, shared memories, pleaded for information. The page still existed, Michael knew. He'd checked it occasionally over the years. The last post had been 3 months ago. A photo of what would have been Emily's 35th birthday. "Still missing you every day," the caption read. "Still hoping for answers." And now, 8 years later, Michael was holding those answers in his hand, or at least the beginning of them. Now, 8 years later, a lightning strike had revealed the first piece of evidence, and it was pointing them straight toward Tenaya Canyon. Michael and 3 other rangers set out at dawn the next morning. They followed a narrow trail that wound through dense forest and over slick granite slopes. The coordinates led them deeper and deeper into the canyon. The terrain became more brutal with every mile. Loose rocks, sheer drop-offs, the sound of rushing water echoing off the canyon walls. After 3 hours of hiking, they reached the coordinates. It was a small plateau, maybe 20 feet across, tucked into the side of the canyon. A thin waterfall cascaded down the rock face above them, pooling into a shallow basin before disappearing over the edge. Wildflowers grew in patches between the stones. It was beautiful and isolated, the kind of place you'd never find unless you knew exactly where to look. The hike to the coordinates had been grueling. The trail, if you could call it that, had deteriorated significantly since the last time rangers had officially maintained it. Tenaya Canyon had always been considered a high-risk area. The Park Service didn't encourage hikers to venture there. There were no marked trails, no established campsites, no rescue points. Cell service was non-existent. If something went wrong, you were on your own. Sarah Chen had been quiet for most of the hike, but Michael could see the tension in her shoulders. She'd joined the Ranger Service only 3 years ago, and this was her first major recovery operation. The other 2 Rangers, Tom Vasquez and Jennifer Oakes, were veterans like Michael. They'd all seen their share of tragedy. Bodies recovered from falls, drowning victims pulled from rivers, but this case felt different. The time gap, the mystery, the pregnancy, it all added layers of weight to what they were about to find. As they'd climbed higher into the canyon, the terrain had become more treacherous. Loose scree that shifted underfoot, narrow ledges with 100-foot drops on one side. At one point, they'd had to cross a section where the rock face was nearly vertical. Tom had gone first, finding handholds and calling back instructions to the others. Michael had gone last, making sure everyone made it safely. The sound of rushing water had grown louder as they approached the coordinates. Tenaya Creek ran through this section of the canyon, fed by snowmelt from the high peaks. Even in mid-June, the water was freezing cold. They'd passed several small waterfalls, each one creating a fine mist that soaked their clothing and made the rocks slippery. When they finally reached the plateau, Michael's first thought was how peaceful it seemed. The violence of the terrain around them, the sharp rocks, the rushing water, the sheer drops. All of it seemed to fade away here. This small flat space felt like a sanctuary, like a place someone might choose to rest or to wait. The wildflowers surprised him. Bright purple lupines, yellow monkey flowers, delicate white blooms he didn't recognize. They grew in clusters between the rocks, somehow finding enough soil and sunlight to thrive in this harsh environment. A few butterflies drifted between the flowers, their wings catching the light. Michael wondered if Emily had seen these flowers, if she'd noticed their beauty even as everything around her was falling apart. Or maybe the flowers hadn't been blooming yet in January. Maybe this place had looked different then. Colder, darker, more desperate. Michael scanned the area. At first, there was nothing unusual, just rocks and water and sky. Then one of the other rangers, a woman named Sarah Chen, called out. She was standing near the edge of the plateau, looking down at something. Michael walked over. There, wedged between two boulders, was a backpack, faded blue with dirt caked into the fabric. Sarah carefully pulled it out. The zippers were rusted shut, but she managed to force one open. Inside, they found a wallet, a crumpled map of Yosemite, and a waterproof pouch. The wallet belonged to Jason Parker. His driver's license was still there, along with a credit card and a photo of him and Emily, arms around each other, smiling at the camera. Emily's hand rested on her stomach, just starting to show. Sarah opened the waterproof pouch. Inside was a small notebook, its pages stiff and stained, but still readable. Michael took it carefully and opened to the first page. It was a journal, Jason's handwriting. The first entry was dated January 10, 2016. Day 1 of the Babymoon. Emily's glowing. I've never seen her this happy. We hiked to Vernal Fall this morning. She made me promise we'd bring our kid back here someday. I promised. I meant it. Michael asked Tom to photograph each page of the journal before they read further. They needed documentation, evidence. But also, he felt a strange responsibility to preserve Jason's words exactly as he'd written them. This journal was the only voice Jason had left. As Tom worked, Sarah pulled out the other items from the backpack. A crumpled park map with a route marked in red ink from Yosemite Village to Tenaya Lake. A half-empty water bottle. A granola bar still sealed. A small first aid kit unopened. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag, was a smartphone. Michael's heart jumped. A phone. If they could get it working, there might be photos, messages, more information about what had happened. But the phone was dead, the screen cracked, the charging port corroded by years of moisture. They'd need to get it to a forensics lab. Maybe the data could be recovered. Maybe not. Jennifer found something else. Tucked into a side pocket of the backpack was a small Ziploc bag containing receipts and ticket stubs. Evidence of Emily and Jason's trip before everything went wrong. A receipt from a coffee shop in Yosemite Village dated January 11th. 2 hot chocolates and a blueberry muffin. A ticket stub from the Ansel Adams Gallery dated January 13th. A receipt from a grocery store in El Portal dated January 15th. Bottled water, trail mix, fruit, sandwiches. Supplies for a day hike. Michael looked at these mundane artifacts and felt a profound sadness. Just days before disaster struck, Jason and Emily had been living a normal, happy life, drinking hot chocolate, looking at photographs, planning their hike. They'd had no idea what was coming, no warning that their Babymoon would become their final journey. The forensics team later managed to recover some data from the phone, mostly photos. Jason and Emily at Mirror Lake, Emily's hand on her stomach, both of them grinning. A selfie taken at the top of Nevada Fall. the mist from the waterfall creating a rainbow in the background. A video of Emily laughing as Jason tried to identify bird calls and kept getting them wrong. The last photo on the phone was dated January 17, 2016 at 11:47 a.m. Emily sitting on a rock, taking a break during the hike. She looked tired, but happy. Her hand rested on her belly. Jason's shadow stretched across the ground in front of her. The timestamp haunted Michael. 11:47 a.m. on January 17th. According to Jason's journal, Emily had started having cramps around noon. Less than 15 minutes after that last photo, everything had begun to fall apart. The entries continued. Day 2, Day 3. Happy, ordinary moments. Watching the sunrise, eating trail mix, talking about baby names. Then, on January 17th, the tone changed. We decided to hike to Tenaya Canyon today. I know it's a tough route, but Emily insisted she felt strong. The weather's supposed to hold. We packed extra water and snacks. If we pace ourselves, we should be fine. The next entry was written hours later, and the handwriting was shaky. Something's wrong. Emily started having cramps around noon. Bad ones. She said it felt like contractions, but it's too early. Way too early. We're trying to get back, but the trail is harder than we thought. She needs to rest every few minutes. I'm scared. Michael's stomach tightened. He turned the page. The next entry was dated January 18th. We couldn't make it back. Emily collapsed last night. She's bleeding. I don't know what to do. I tried calling for help, but there's no signal. I tried to carry her, but the terrain is too steep. We're stuck. The handwriting got worse after that, more desperate, more frantic. Please, if anyone finds this, we're at these coordinates. Emily needs a hospital. The baby. The sentence stopped mid-word. The final entry was dated January 20th. Just one line. She's gone. The team stood in silence. Sarah had tears in her eyes. Michael felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. They'd found Jason's journal. But they hadn't found Jason, or Emily, or any sign of what happened after that last entry. Michael looked around the plateau again. If Jason had been here, where did he go? Why wasn't there a body? And why had he buried the ultrasound photo 8 years ago under a tree 4 miles away? Then Sarah noticed something else. On the rock face behind them, just above the waterfall, there were markings. Faint, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. Michael climbed up carefully and examined them. They were words carved into the stone with something sharp, a knife maybe, or a rock. I tried. I'm sorry. I love you both. Below the words was another set of coordinates. Michael's heart was pounding now. He entered the new coordinates into his GPS. They pointed northwest, about 2 miles away, toward the higher elevations of the canyon. The team pushed on. The hike was brutal. The trail, if you could even call it that, was little more than a narrow ledge cut into the canyon wall. One wrong step, and you'd fall 100 feet into the river below. Michael's legs were shaking by the time they reached the second location. It was a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of vines and moss. The entrance was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Michael pulled out his flashlight and stepped inside. The cave was shallow, maybe 10 feet deep. The walls were damp and cold, and in the back, lying on a bed of pine branches and leaves, were 2 bodies. They were skeletal now, after 8 years of exposure, but the clothing was intact enough to identify them. A woman in a red fleece jacket, a man in a blue windbreaker, Emily and Jason Parker. They were lying side by side. Jason's arm was draped over Emily's shoulders. Between them, Carefully placed was a small white blanket, baby-sized. Michael's throat tightened. He stepped closer, his flashlight illuminating the scene. On the cave wall above the bodies, Jason had carved more words. The letters were uneven, clearly done with great effort. We didn't make it home, but we're together, always. Sarah radioed for a recovery team. It would take hours for them to arrive. In the meantime, the rangers documented everything: the cave, the bodies, the blanket. And then Michael noticed something else. Near Emily's hand, there was another small notebook, smaller than Jason's journal. He picked it up carefully and opened it. The handwriting was different, shakier, Emily's. There were only a few entries. The first one was dated January 18th, 2016. I'm losing the baby. I can feel it. Jason keeps telling me it's going to be okay, but I know it's not. I'm so scared. The next entry was dated January 19th. The baby's gone. I delivered her last night. She was so small, so perfect. Jason wrapped her in his spare shirt. We buried her just outside the cave. I don't know what to do now. I don't know how to keep living. Michael felt tears running down his face. He turned to the last entry, January 20th. Jason is getting weaker. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. He keeps saying we need to save our strength, but I know he's giving me his food. I told him to leave me, to go get help. He won't. He says we stay together. I love him so much. The final line was barely legible. If anyone finds this, please know we loved her. We loved our little girl. Her name was Hope. Michael and his team waited in the cave as the sun began to set. They'd called for the recovery team hours ago, but the terrain was so difficult that it would take time for the specialists to arrive with the proper equipment. They couldn't move the bodies themselves. This had to be done carefully, respectfully, by the book. As they waited, Michael read through Emily's journal again and again. Each time he noticed new details, small things that broke his heart in different ways. In one entry, Emily had written about feeling the baby move for the first time. Like butterflies, she'd written, like tiny little bubbles. Jason put his hand on my stomach and waited so patiently, and then he felt it too. He cried. I've never seen him cry before. He said he couldn't believe we made something so perfect. In another entry, she'd written about their plans for the nursery. They'd already picked out paint colors, a soft yellow for the walls, white furniture, a mobile with little woodland animals. Jason wants to paint a mural, Emily had written, trees and mountains, so the baby grows up loving nature as much as we do. I told him he can't paint to save his life, but he's determined to try. I love him so much it hurts. The last few entries were harder to read. Emily's handwriting deteriorated as her strength failed. Words became fragments. Sentences trailed off. But even in those final moments, her love for Jason and their baby came through. Jay won't leave me. Told him to. He won't. Staying together, always together. Sarah had stepped outside the cave, needing air. Michael found her sitting on a rock, looking out at the canyon. The sky was turning orange and purple, the last light of day painting the granite walls in warm colors. I can't stop thinking about what it must have been like, Sarah said quietly, being stuck here, knowing no one was coming, watching your baby die, watching your partner get weaker, and still choosing to stay together. Michael sat down beside her. Jason had a chance to save himself, he said. He could have left Emily, made it back to civilization. But he didn't. Would you have? Sarah asked. Michael thought about it, really thought about it. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to say yes. I want to believe I'd stay. But when you're actually in that situation, when survival instinct kicks in, who knows what we'd really do?" Jason and Emily, they proved what they'd do. They proved their love was stronger than fear, stronger than the will to survive. The recovery team arrived just after dark, their headlamps cutting through the shadows. They brought body bags, stretchers, climbing equipment. The team leader, a woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, had overseen dozens of recovery operations in Yosemite. But even she seemed shaken when she saw the cave. The two bodies side by side, the baby blanket between them, the carved message on the wall. "We'll take care of them," Dr. Reeves said softly. "We'll bring them home." The process took hours. Every movement had to be careful, deliberate. The bodies were fragile after 8 years of exposure. Bones had to be documented, photographed, collected piece by piece. The baby's remains were the hardest. So small, so heartbreaking. Dr. Reeves handled them with a tenderness that made Michael's eyes sting with tears. By the time they'd finished, it was nearly midnight. The team made the difficult hike back to the trailhead by headlamp, moving slowly and carefully with their precious cargo. Michael walked at the rear of the group, looking back occasionally at the cave disappearing into darkness behind them. The Park Service held a press conference 3 days later. News of the discovery had leaked almost immediately. Within hours, reporters from across the country were calling. The story had everything the media loved: mystery, tragedy, romance, redemption. The conference room was packed with journalists, cameras, microphones. The park superintendent gave a brief statement. The remains of Jason Parker, Emily Parker, and their infant daughter Hope had been recovered from Tenaya Canyon. The cause of death appeared to be exposure and medical complications related to premature labor. The case was being officially closed as a tragic accident. The families had been notified and requested privacy. Then came the questions. How did you find them after 8 years? What led you to that specific location? Why wasn't the cave discovered during the original search? Michael stood at the back of the room, watching the superintendent field questions with practiced diplomatic responses. The truth was, the cave never would have been found through normal search methods. It was too remote, too hidden, too far from any established trail. Only Jason's carefully planned trail of clues, the buried bottle, the carved coordinates, had made discovery possible. Even then, it had taken a random lightning strike to start the chain of events. Emily's mother attended the press conference. Michael recognized her from 2016, though she looked older now, worn down by years of grief and uncertainty. When the superintendent finished speaking, she approached the microphone. Her hands were shaking. "I want to thank the rangers and everyone who helped bring my daughter home," she said, her voice breaking. "For 8 years, I didn't know. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop wondering. Now I know. And even though the answer isn't what I hoped for, at least I can finally say goodbye. At least Emily and Jason are together. At least little Hope is with her parents. That brings me some peace." She pulled out a photo, the same photo Michael had seen in Jason's wallet. Emily and Jason, arms around each other, smiling. "They were so in love," Emily's mother said. "So excited about the baby. So happy. I want everyone to remember that. Not just the tragedy, but the love. That's what matters." The recovery team arrived at dusk. They carefully moved Emily and Jason's remains out of the cave. Just outside the entrance, they found a third grave. Tiny, marked with a small cairn of stones. They excavated it gently. Inside, wrapped in a faded blue shirt, were the remains of a premature infant, 20 weeks old, just like the ultrasound had shown. The team worked through the night. By morning, they'd pieced together what happened. Jason and Emily had been hiking to Tenaya Canyon when Emily went into premature labor. They'd tried to make it back, but the terrain was too difficult. Emily had collapsed. They'd found the cave and sheltered there, hoping someone would find them. But no one did. Emily delivered the baby on January 19, 2016. The baby didn't survive. Emily, already weak from blood loss and dehydration, grew worse. Jason stayed with her, even as his own strength faded. They died together sometime around January 21st or 22nd. The exact date was impossible to know, but the mystery wasn't fully solved. How did the ultrasound photo end up under that tree 4 miles away? Why had Jason carved those coordinates into the bark? The answer came from the journal. In the days before Emily went into labor, Jason had written about a backup plan. If anything went wrong, he'd leave markers, clues. He'd hidden the ultrasound in a waterproof bottle and buried it near a distinctive landmark, the tallest Jeffrey pine in the area. He'd carved coordinates into the bark, pointing to their location. He thought someone would find it. He thought it would lead rescuers to them in time, but the tree was off the main trail, hidden in a dense section of forest. No one noticed the carvings. No one found the bottle. Not until 8 years later, when a lightning strike brought the tree down and exposed Jason's desperate message. The investigation concluded in August 2024. Emily, Jason, and baby Hope Parker were laid to rest together in Sacramento. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, family, friends, strangers who'd followed the story and felt connected to the young couple who'd loved each other until the very end. Michael Thornton stood at the edge of the service, watching from a distance. He'd been asked to speak, but he'd declined. What could he say? That he'd found them too late? That a random act of nature, a lightning strike, had been the only reason they were ever discovered? But there was something else, something he couldn't quite explain. The night before he found the bottle, Michael had been at home, reading a book. Around 10 p.m. the storm had hit, lightning everywhere. He'd gone to his window to watch, and at one point he'd seen a single bolt strike somewhere in the distance, near Cathedral Peak. It had been so bright, so intense, that it left spots in his vision. The next morning he'd gone to inspect the trails. He'd chosen the Cathedral Peak route on a whim. He could have gone anywhere, but something had pulled him there, to that tree, to that bottle. Was it chance, or was it something more? Michael didn't believe in fate. He was a man of logic and evidence. But standing there at the funeral, watching Emily and Jason's family say goodbye, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, Jason's message had been meant to be found, not in time to save them, but in time to bring them home. The case was officially closed in September 2024. The Park Service installed a small memorial plaque at the trailhead near Tenaya Canyon. It read, "In memory of Emily, Jason, and Hope Parker. May they rest in peace together." Hikers still visit the spot. Some leave flowers, some leave notes, and some just stand there, looking out at the wilderness, thinking about how quickly everything can change, how fragile life is, how love, even in the darkest moments, can endure. Michael still works as a ranger at Yosemite. He still patrols the trails. He still checks for storm damage. And every time he passes that burned Jeffrey pine, or what's left of it, he stops for a moment. He thinks about Jason carving those coordinates into the bark with shaking hands. He thinks about Emily writing in her journal even as her strength faded. He thinks about Hope, who never got to see the mountains her parents loved so much. And he wonders, If the storm had hit a different tree, if he'd chosen a different trail that morning, if the bottle had stayed buried for another 8 years, or 80, or forever, would anyone have ever known what happened to the Parkers? Some mysteries are solved by skill and determination. Others are solved by chance. And some, Michael thought, are solved because someone somewhere decided it was time for the truth to come out. Even if it came 8 years too late, the wilderness keeps its secrets. But sometimes, if you listen closely enough, it tells you where to look. So what do you think? Was it just chance that led Michael to that tree? Or was there something more at work? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to support this channel and hear more stories like this, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I love you all. Until next time.